Millionaire thought he was trapped in an arranged marriage, until the bride removed her veil. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The title of today's story is Millionaire thought he was trapped in an arranged marriage until the bride removed her veil. The grand hall was lit with dazzling chandeliers, their golden lights spilling across the polished marble floor. Every guest whispered behind raised hands, their curious eyes fixed on the groom standing at the altar. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a midnight black suit, the very image of power and cold authority. His name was Alexander Hayes, the young heir of one of the most influential business empires in New York. He was used to controlling every detail of his life, but tonight he had no control at all. Alexander's jaw was tight, his expression hard as granite. To him, this wedding was nothing more than a trap, a cage constructed by his parents and their endless thirst for social alliances. He had refused countless proposals, yet this time he was forced to surrender. The rumors about the bride had reached him long before tonight. She was plain, unremarkable, even considered unattractive by those who knew of her. And yet, she was chosen because her family could save his father's crumbling partnership. To Alexander, it was humiliating. The organ began to play, and the air shifted. Guests turned toward the wide doors as they opened slowly. There she was, his bride, hidden behind a long, flowing veil. Her steps were careful, her head slightly lowered, the lace of her gown brushing against the aisle as she walked. No one could see her face, only the faint outline of her figure beneath the fabric. Whispers stirred again. Poor Alexander. Imagine a man like him marrying her. They say she begged for this match, can you believe it? It is all about the money, nothing else. Each comment sliced deeper into the bride's heart, but she did not break her stride. She walked forward with quiet dignity, clutching a small bouquet of white roses. Beneath that veil, her lips pressed into a line, not of shame, but of resolve. Alexander clenched his fists. To him, this was unbearable theater. He told himself, this marriage means nothing. It is just a contract, nothing more. He did not even glance at her as she arrived at his side, the veil still hiding her completely from view. The ceremony began, words flowing from the officiant about love and union, yet there was no warmth between them. For Alexander, every vow felt like a chain tightening around his neck. For her, every vow was a sacrifice she made for her struggling family, though she carried it with quiet strength. When it was time to seal the vows, the officiant paused. You may now lift the veil. The room held its breath. Alexander's hand hovered, but he hesitated, disgust flashing across his eyes. He did not want to. He did not care who she was. To him, she was already a burden, but fate would not wait forever. The veil trembled slightly, as if the bride herself prepared to reveal what everyone had been waiting to see. And in that single suspended moment, the entire hall leaned forward, ready for the truth that would change everything. The veil lowered again after the ceremony ended, and the guests dispersed with hushed laughter that still echoed through the grand hall. Alexander walked ahead, his strides long and impatient, as if trying to escape the weight of what had just happened. His new wife followed several steps behind, her hands clasped tightly around the bouquet, her posture straight even though her heart ached. Inside the limousine, silence pressed between them like a wall. Alexander did not look at her. His gaze was fixed on the city lights flashing past the tinted windows. Finally, his voice cut the silence, cold and sharp. This marriage is nothing more than business. You know that, do you not? Her head turned slightly beneath the veil, her voice soft but steady. I know, and I do not expect more than what you agreed to. I only ask for respect. Alexander scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping. Respect? When your family begged for this union? When my parents forced me into this humiliation? Do not ask for what you have not earned. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet until the thorns pricked her skin. She did not cry. Instead, she replied with quiet dignity. Perhaps one day you will realize that dignity cannot be bought or sold. It is carried in silence, even when the world mocks you. The car pulled up to his mansion, a sprawling estate of glass and stone. Servants rushed to open the doors, bowing politely. Their eyes lingered on the veiled bride, some with curiosity, others with pity. Alexander strode ahead without offering his hand. In the privacy of the grand foyer, Alexander turned sharply. "There will be rules," he declared. "You will stay in the East Wing. We will not share a room. You will not attend any public events with me unless absolutely necessary. This arrangement exists only to satisfy our parents. Beyond that, you mean nothing to me." Her chin lifted slightly, a flicker of fire sparking behind the veil. "If those are your terms, I accept. But do not mistake silence for weakness. I will keep my part of the contract, but I will not be ashamed of who I am." For a moment, Alexander faltered. Her voice carried a strength he had not expected, an unshakable pride that did not match the rumors he had heard. But his pride was stronger. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Very well. Stay out of my way." That night, while Alexander locked himself in his study, drowning in business files and bourbon, she quietly settled into her assigned room. The walls were cold, the furniture minimal, but she placed her small belongings carefully, a worn leather sketchbook on the nightstand, a fountain pen beside it. She opened the book and began to draw lines flowing across the page, shapes forming into images of strength, freedom, and hidden dreams. In another part of the mansion, Alexander stared into his glass, his jaw tight. He could not explain why her words echoed in his mind. Respect. Dignity. They were not the words of someone desperate or pathetic. They were the words of someone who carried storms beneath silence. Outside, the city glittered against the night sky, but within the mansion, two lives bound by a contract stood on opposite ends of a vast emotional distance. Neither knew that the veil between them would not only hide her face, but also conceal the truth that could shatter everything he believed. And in that fragile stillness, the first spark of conflict was lit, a flame that would soon burn brighter than either of them could imagine. Days passed in a strained silence inside Alexander's mansion. The arrangement was cold, practical, and deliberately distant. Each morning, Alexander left for his corporate headquarters before sunrise, his schedule packed with endless meetings, deals, and battles for power. Each evening he returned late, often retreating directly into his study without acknowledging the woman who now carried his last name. The household staff followed his lead, treating the bride with cautious politeness but keeping their distance. Whispers traveled quickly through the corridors. "She is hidden for a reason. He does not want her seen." Yet she walked with quiet composure, never responding to their sideways glances. On the third evening, Alexander summoned her to his study. The vast room smelled faintly of leather and whiskey, the mahogany desk piled with contracts and stock reports. He did not look up as she entered, her veil still concealing her face. His voice was brisk, businesslike. "There are conditions you must follow," Alexander said. "This marriage is nothing more than a shield for appearances. You will not attempt to play the role of a wife. There will be no pretense of affection. You will attend only those events where my parents insist upon your presence, and you will not interfere with my personal life." She stood quietly, hands folded before her. When she finally spoke, her tone was steady, almost detached. "I understand. You want a marriage in name only, a contract, not a bond." "Exactly," Alexander replied, finally meeting her hidden gaze. His eyes were sharp, as if daring her to protest. Instead, she nodded calmly. "Then allow me one condition as well. I will not bring shame upon you, but in return, you will not strip me of my dignity. I will live in this house as you command, but I will not be treated as an object." Her words unsettled him, though he refused to show it. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "As long as you keep silent and stay out of my way, we will not have problems." The moment hung heavy in the room. She lowered her eyes, not in submission, but in quiet defiance. Then she turned and left, her footsteps measured, leaving Alexander with an odd sensation, an irritation mixed with curiosity. That night, when the mansion grew quiet, she returned to her room and opened her leather sketchbook. By the glow of a single lamp, her pencil moved across the page. She drew not the walls of her confinement, but visions of freedom, bridges, skylines, open seas. The sketchbook became her private sanctuary, a world where she was not bound by Alexander's rules or society's judgment. Meanwhile, Alexander found himself restless. He poured another drink, staring at the city through the tall windows of his study. Her condition replayed in his mind. Do not strip me of my dignity. It was not a plea. It was a command wrapped in restraint. For a man who believed he controlled every deal, every signature, every outcome, it was unsettling to realize that this veiled bride, whom he had dismissed as insignificant, had negotiated her own line in their contract. She had staked her claim to respect in a world where he had offered her nothing. The household continued with rigid precision, but beneath the surface, the boundaries had been drawn. A fragile truce now existed between them, written not on paper but in the steel of her voice and the unspoken weight in his silence. And though Alexander told himself it was only a formality, a cage he could ignore, something about those words lingered, quietly undermining his certainty. The contract had been signed, the rules declared, but the true battle between pride and dignity had only just begun. The first week of their arranged life passed with rigid distance, each of them orbiting within the same mansion yet never colliding. Alexander devoted himself to his empire, making headlines with bold acquisitions and ruthless boardroom decisions. At home, he maintained the same cold detachment, speaking to her only when necessity demanded it. To the outside world, they appeared as strangers sharing the same roof. Yet despite his calculated indifference, Alexander began to notice small details he could not ignore. One morning, he awoke to find his study door slightly ajar. On his desk, beside the mountain of paperwork he had left the night before, rested a cup of coffee. The steam still rose, carrying a faint hint of cinnamon. He frowned, suspicious, but when he sipped it, the flavor struck him it was exactly how he preferred it, strong with just a trace of spice. He called for his assistant. Who brought this? The butler hesitated. It was Madam, sir. Alexander dismissed the servant with a wave, unsettled. How could she have known his taste? He never told her. Later that evening, as he returned from the office, he caught a glimpse of her in the garden. The veil remained, but her hands worked gently, tending to a patch of roses. He noticed the servants nearby. Their usual stiffness softened. She was speaking to them kindly, even laughing with one of the maids about the stubborn soil. The staff, who once whispered in judgment, now leaned toward her as if drawn by her quiet warmth. Still, Alexander hardened his heart. Do not be deceived. This is nothing more than pretense, he told himself. But his eyes lingered longer than he intended before he turned away. Days later, a storm swept across the city. Lightning cracked, and the power flickered in the mansion. Alexander was pacing his study when he heard hurried footsteps in the hall. He opened the door to find her kneeling beside one of the younger maids, who was trembling in fear. The girl clutched her chest, struggling to breathe. Without hesitation, his wife pressed a hand to the maid's shoulder. Do not panic. Breathe slowly with me. Her voice was calm, steady, and she guided the girl through each breath until the storm outside seemed to fade. When the maid's color returned, she smiled softly. You are safe now. Alexander stood frozen, watching. There was no pretense in her tone, no attempt to impress. It was pure instinct, pure compassion. He realized with a strange jolt that this was not the behavior of someone desperate to cling to privilege. This was the strength of someone who carried herself with quiet authority. Later that night, as the storm subsided, Alexander returned to his study, unsettled. He poured himself a drink but did not touch it. Instead, he stared at the closed door of the east wing. He told himself it meant nothing, but the truth was gnawing at him. She was not what he had been told. In her room, unaware of his turmoil, she wrote in her sketchbook. Across the page, she drew the storm, dark clouds, jagged lightning, and then a figure standing tall against it, steady and unbroken. Beneath the drawing, she wrote a single line. Dignity does not bow to thunder. The mansion still felt divided, its east and west wings like separate worlds. Yet somewhere in the silence between them, something unspoken had shifted. Alexander could no longer dismiss her so easily. Every small act he observed built a contradiction that challenged the image he had believed. And though he fought to ignore it, he could not escape the quiet realization that the woman he had vowed to disregard was slowly, without effort, altering the rhythm of his world. It was 2 weeks into their silent marriage when the first public event arrived. Alexander's parents insisted that he and his wife attend a charity gala hosted by one of their most powerful business allies. The pressure was immense, and the whispers surrounding the mysterious veiled bride had already become a topic of curiosity in high society. The grand ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, filled with New York's elite. Alexander entered with his bride on his arm, though his grip was more formality than affection. As always, her face was hidden beneath the veil, a decision that fueled even more gossip. "Is she really as plain as they say?" a woman whispered loudly enough to be overheard. "Perhaps worse," another replied, laughter cutting sharp through the music. "I heard Alexander hides her away. Imagine being so ashamed of your own wife." The cruel words followed them with every step. Alexander kept his gaze forward, his expression unreadable, but his silence cut deeper than the whispers. His wife held her head high, refusing to show pain, though inside her heart tightened. She reminded herself, dignity does not bow to thunder. At the long table reserved for honored guests, Alexander spoke little, focused on conversations about mergers and future deals. His wife sat quietly beside him, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Then, one of the business partners leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "So, Alexander," the man drawled, raising his glass, "when will we finally see the face of this mysterious bride? Or is she so dreadful that even you cannot bear the sight?" The table erupted in cruel laughter, her chest constricted, but she remained still, her posture straight. She whispered to herself, "Do not break." Suddenly, the sketchbook she always carried slipped from her small purse and fell to the floor with a thud. The mocking man reached down before she could, flipping it open. Pages of detailed drawings spilled into view, bridges, cities, portraits alive with emotion. "Look at this," he sneered, holding it up for others to see. "The little bride plays at being an artist. How quaint." Laughter followed, sharper this time, echoing through the hall. Guests leaned closer, amused by her humiliation. Alexander said nothing. He raised his glass and sipped his drink, his silence more wounding than the mockery itself. To the guests, his indifference confirmed the rumors that he did not care for his wife, that she was nothing more than a burden forced upon him. Her fingers trembled as she retrieved the sketchbook, holding it close to her chest. Her voice remained steady, though her heart cracked inside. "It is not play, it is my truth." But no one listened. The laughter rolled on, leaving her isolated at the glittering table. Alexander continued his conversation as if she were invisible, the sound of his measured tones striking her harder than any insult. When the evening ended, they returned to the mansion in silence. She retreated to her room, closed the door, and pressed the sketchbook to her chest. Tears finally fell, not for the cruelty of strangers, but for the man who had vowed to stand beside her and instead left her defenseless. In his study, Alexander poured himself another drink. For the first time, the echo of her whispered words, "It is my truth," lingered in his mind, unsettling him. He told himself it was meaningless. Yet a strange discomfort gnawed at him, one that no amount of bourbon could drown. The gala had ended, but the humiliation would leave scars. For her, it was a reminder that silence could wound as deeply as words. For him, it was the beginning of a fracture in his certainty, a small crack that would one day split wide open. And somewhere beyond that night's silence, destiny prepared the moment when the veil would no longer protect him from the truth he had refused to see. The humiliation of the gala lingered like smoke in the air, impossible to sweep away. Days turned into nights, yet the memory of cruel laughter haunted her steps through the mansion's echoing halls. She carried her sketchbook closer than ever, as if guarding her soul from being torn apart again. Alexander buried himself in work, but the image of her quiet defense, "It is not play, it is my truth," continued to resurface when he least expected. For the first time, silence no longer felt like control. It felt like cowardice. He tried to drown it with endless meetings, long hours, and bourbon late into the night. But the thought of her unwavering dignity gnawed at him. The turning point arrived one evening when the Hayes family was invited to a formal dinner hosted by the city's mayor. It was an event too public for Alexander to refuse, and his wife had to attend by his side. Once again, the veil shrouded her face as she walked into the glittering hall, whispers rising like a tide around them. The evening progressed with the usual chatter of politics and wealth, until the mayor's wife announced a surprise. "We will honor our guests tonight with a dance. Mr. Hayes, will you not lead your bride?" Alexander stiffened. He had never once touched her hand in public, and now the crowd's eyes pressed down on him. Reluctantly, he stood, offering his arm. She accepted, her movements graceful despite the veil. They stepped into the center of the floor, the orchestra swelling around them. The dance began, but midway through, another guest, one of Alexander's rivals, decided to add fuel to the whispers. With a smirk, he strode toward them and tugged sharply at the edge of her veil. Gasps filled the room as the delicate fabric slipped free, drifting to the polished floor like a fallen cloud. For the first time, her face was revealed beneath the chandelier's glow. The hall went silent. She was not plain. She was breathtaking. Her features, refined and luminous, held a quiet strength that silenced mockery in an instant. Her eyes, deep and unflinching, carried both pain and defiance. She was not a figure to be pitied. She was a woman who commanded the room simply by existing. Alexander froze, his heart slamming against his chest. He had prepared himself for shame, but instead, he felt his breath stolen. This was the woman he had dismissed, the woman he had ignored. His arrogance had blinded him to the truth that was now undeniable. Whispers shifted through the crowd, transformed from ridicule to stunned admiration. She is beautiful. How could we have believed otherwise? But for her, the moment was not triumph. It was exposure. She bent down, retrieved the veil, and draped it back over her hair with trembling hands. The tears she refused to shed shimmered at the edges of her vision. Alexander reached for her arm, but she pulled back slightly. Her voice was calm, though it quivered with hurt. Now you see the truth, but it changes nothing. A cage is still a cage, whether gilded or bare. Ugh. The orchestra faltered into silence. The rival who had torn the veil smirked, but even he seemed unsettled by the revelation. The room had turned, admiration flooding where cruelty once lived, yet she stood apart, holding her dignity like armor. Alexander struggled to form words, his throat tight with regret. For the first time in years, he found himself speechless, not from anger, but from shame. The truth had been unveiled before everyone, and it left him stripped of his arrogance. That night, as the mansion doors closed behind them, the silence between them was no longer cold indifference. It was heavy with unspoken questions, raw wounds, and the echo of a revelation that neither could escape. And for Alexander, the weight of his silence at the gala, paired with the image of her unveiled strength, marked the beginning of a reckoning he could no longer avoid. The revelation at the mayor's dinner spread quickly through the city's social circles. Overnight, the whispers about Alexander's plain bride transformed into stunned conversations about her hidden beauty and quiet strength. But while society's opinion shifted, the wound she carried from his indifference remained unhealed. Back at the mansion, the silence between them deepened. Alexander, once certain of his control, now felt the weight of shame pressing heavily on his chest. He replayed the moment over and over, the veil falling, her eyes filled with pain, and his own failure to defend her when she needed him most. The change began subtly. When business partners mocked her in his presence, Alexander no longer stayed quiet. At a board luncheon, one executive chuckled, "So the rumors were wrong after all. You were lucky, Hayes." Alexander's response was sharp, his voice like steel. "My wife is not a subject for your gossip. Speak of her again, and you will not have a place at this table." The room fell silent, the weight of his authority undeniable. At home, he began noticing her presence in ways that unsettled him. She continued her quiet routines, helping staff, sketching late at night, showing kindness to those around her. But now, Alexander watched with new eyes. He saw how she carried herself with grace, how she bore humiliation without breaking, how her silence was not weakness but power. One evening, he found her in the library, sketchbook open on her lap. She looked up, startled, as he entered. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said almost reluctantly, "Those drawings, they are remarkable." She closed the book slowly. "They are not for your approval. They are for me. They are the only place where I am free." Her words struck him harder than any accusation. He wanted to apologize, but pride chained his tongue. Instead, he said softly, "Freedom should not be limited to paper." She studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she rose and walked past him, leaving the faint scent of roses in the air. That night, Alexander lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing for the first time that he did not simply want to protect her because of duty or guilt. He wanted to protect her because he could no longer imagine the world mocking her, or worse, breaking her spirit. And in that quiet recognition, the battle between pride and love truly began. The nights grew heavier for Alexander as the weight of unspoken truths pressed harder against him. He had begun to defend her publicly, but within the mansion, the distance between them still loomed like an invisible wall. He could not undo the silence of the past, yet he could no longer bear the thought of continuing as strangers under the same roof. One evening, as autumn rain lashed against the windows, Alexander found her in the conservatory. She was standing by the tall glass panes, the soft glow of a single lamp illuminating her profile. Her veil was gone now. Since the dinner, she no longer hid her face inside the mansion. Instead, she let her beauty and her sorrow exist side by side, unshielded. For a long moment, Alexander simply watched her. Then, with a steady breath, he stepped closer. "I owe you what I should have given long ago, an apology." She turned, her eyes steady, calm as still water. "An apology cannot erase the nights I was humiliated while you stayed silent." Her words cut deep, but Alexander did not retreat. "You are right. I failed you. I told myself this marriage was only a contract, but I was a coward. I let my pride blind me to the woman you are. I see you now, and I cannot go back to who I was before." She closed her sketchbook, placing it gently on the table between them. "You see me now because others have seen me. You defend me now because the world knows the truth. But where were you when I was mocked, when my art was ridiculed, when silence was the only answer I received from you?" Alexander's chest tightened. "I cannot change what I did, but I can prove that I will never be that man again. I want to protect you, not because of duty, but because I love you." The words hung heavy in the room, raw and trembling. It was the first time he had admitted them to her, and to himself. She looked at him, her eyes shimmering not with tears, but with the weight of disbelief. "Love? Do you think love is born only after beauty is revealed? Do you think love can grow in a cage built on pride?" Her challenge burned, but Alexander did not flinch. "Love is born when truth finally breaks through lies. And I will spend every day proving that my love is more than words." Her gaze lingered on him, searching for cracks in his resolve. Then, with quiet strength, she said, "If you mean what you say, then prove it. There will come a day when you must choose between your empire and me. On that day, I will know if these words are truth or another cage." Alexander's breath caught. He knew the weight of her challenge. His empire was everything he had built, everything his pride clung to. But as he looked at her, standing tall in the glow of the lamp, he realized that without her, all the wealth and power meant nothing. He reached for her hand, hesitant, almost afraid. To his relief, she did not pull away. She let him hold it, though her expression remained unreadable. "Do not fail me again," she whispered. "I will not," he vowed. The storm outside raged on, but inside the conservatory something shifted. It was not reconciliation, not yet. It was a fragile bridge, built on broken trust and a promise of redemption. For the first time since the wedding, Alexander allowed himself to hope that the marriage could become something real. But her warning lingered like thunder in the distance. His love would only be proven when sacrifice demanded it. And he knew, with a clarity that chilled him, that the test she spoke of was closer than either of them realized. Winter descended on New York, wrapping the city in frost and gray skies. Inside Alexander's empire, storms brewed as fierce as those outside. A rival corporation launched a hostile takeover, striking when the market was weakest. Meetings stretched past midnight, lawyers and executives flooding his office with charts, contracts, and dire predictions. Alexander's father insisted that the solution was simple: merge with the rival's board through another contract marriage. "End this farce," his father demanded. "Annul the first marriage, pay her family their share, and secure the empire. She is expendable." The words ignited fury inside Alexander. Once, he might have obeyed, but now, the thought of casting her aside, after everything she had endured, was unbearable. He stood before his father, his voice steady and defiant. "She is not expendable. She is my wife, and I will not trade her dignity for your empire." The declaration sent shockwaves through the family. For the first time, Alexander openly chose her over the fortune that defined his life. That evening, he returned to the mansion, finding her in the East Wing, seated by the fire with her sketchbook resting in her lap. She looked up at him, cautious, as if bracing for another wound. "I made my choice today," he said quietly. "The board wanted me to cast you aside, but I will not. Not now, not ever. This empire is worthless if I must destroy you to keep it." Her fingers tightened on the sketchbook, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Do you expect me to believe words after so much silence? Words are easy, Alexander. It is action that proves truth." He knelt before her, taking the sketchbook gently from her hands. Opening it, he revealed her drawings, bridges arching into skies, cities alive with light, portraits full of strength. "These pages are more powerful than every contract I have ever signed. I will not let them mock you again. I will not let them silence your truth. I want the world to see you as you are." Her breath caught. For the first time, he was not dismissing her art, but honoring it. Weeks later, during a gala organized by the Hayes Foundation, Alexander stunned the crowd. Instead of unveiling another business venture, he unveiled her artwork. The walls of the grand hall displayed her sketches, magnified and framed, capturing the attention of the city's elite. Guests marveled at the depth and precision, at the soul carried in every line. "This," Alexander announced to the stunned audience, "is the truth I once ignored. My wife's art, her vision, her dignity. Tonight, I choose not only to stand beside her, but to honor her openly. I will never again let silence be my answer." The applause rose, not from politeness, but from genuine awe. For the first time, she was no longer a mystery hidden behind a veil, nor a subject of cruel whispers. She was celebrated in her own right. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for his. The man who once dismissed her now stood proudly at her side, defying not only society but his own past pride. In that moment, the contract that once bound them in cold obligation dissolved into something real. Their marriage was no longer about appearances or business. It was a union born from redemption, sacrifice, and love that had been forged through fire. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander leaned close, his voice low but certain. "I failed you once. I will never fail you again. This is my vow, not as a contract, but as a man who loves you." Her reply was soft, but resolute. "Then let this be the beginning, not of a cage, but of freedom." The guests, the chandeliers, the applause all faded into the background. What remained was a man and a woman standing together, no longer divided by pride, no longer silenced by fear. The story that began with a veil ended with its removal not by force, but by choice. And in that unveiling, both of them found not only love, but justice. For Alexander, true leadership was no longer measured in deals or empires. It was measured in the courage to love openly, to defend dignity, and to choose authenticity over pride. And for her, the woman once mocked and hidden, it was proof that even in a world of power and prejudice, dignity could rise, unbroken, and transform a cage into a stage where love could stand victorious.